Hey guys, what's going on? Major Ryan here, and in my last video, it was an unboxing for the Mobile Suit Gundam Aerial Rebuild Kit. And so in this video, I'm going to be building it. I'm going to switch over and have a top-down view. And while I'm building it, I'm going to talk a little bit about Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, because that's my favorite series in the universe. But this is my first time ever building a Gundam. I'm super excited. As you can see, I have some of the tools, which I unboxed in the last video as well. So stay tuned. We're going to put this thing together. I'm going to tell you how easy it was or hard it was, how I felt about the experience. Please, if you like the video, subscribe, comment, share it. It really helps. This is a new channel, but without further ado, I appreciate you guys being here. Let's get started. Alright guys, so like I said, first I really wanted to start talking about Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, because that's the series that actually got me into Gundam, and it's why I love it still to this day. Now, if you grew up watching anime in the 1990s or early 2000s, there's a good chance you've heard of Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. It's about 5 teenage boys, 5 incredibly powerful Gundams, a war between Earth and the colonies, masked soldiers, political betrayal, friendships, rivalries, and a whole lot of giant robots blowing things up. But Gundam Wing is much more than a typical giant robot anime. It's a story about war, politics, revenge, peace, and it's about 5 young soldiers who are sent into a conflict that is much bigger than they are. So today, I'm going to be going back to 1995 to talk about the anime that introduced an entire generation of Western fans to Gundam, and that's Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. Now, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, which is known in Japan as New Mobile Report Gundam Wing, premiered in Japan on April 7th, 1995. It was created by Hajime Yatate, which I'm sure I'm butchering these names, and Yoshiyuki Tamino, while Masashi Aikida directed the television series. And unlike the original Mobile Suit Gundam, Gundam Wing does not take place in the Universal Century timeline. Instead, it takes place in a completely separate timeline known as After Colony, which is nice because that means you don't actually need to watch the original Gundam series with Amino Ray and whatnot to understand Gundam Wing. It's its own story. Now, the story takes place in the year After Colony 195, like I said, and humanity is expanded into space, creating massive colonies where millions of people live. But Earth still holds political and military power over the colonies. The colonies have very little control over their own future. Eventually, resistance movements begin forming, and one group decides that diplomacy isn't going to be enough. So, they create 5 incredibly powerful mobile suits called Gundams. Then they send 5 teenage pilots to Earth. And what's their mission? They're basically there to destroy the organizations controlling the colonies and fight for the colonies' freedom. But there's a catch. The 5 pilots aren't supposed to work together. Each one is sent on his own secret mission, and each pilot has been trained to accomplish that mission by any means necessary. Now, instead of having one main pilot like Amuro Ray in the original Gundam, Gundam Wing gives us 5 Gundam pilots. These are the 5 teenagers I talked about, and every one of them has a completely different personality. The first is Hiro Yoi. Hiro is the pilot of the Wing Gundam, and he's probably the most recognizable character in the series. He's also one of the strangest. Hiro has been trained from childhood to be a soldier and assassin, and he's incredibly intelligent, physically capable, and almost completely emotionally shut down. His attitude toward his mission is basically complete the mission at any cost. He doesn't care if he gets hurt, he doesn't care if he dies. And at the beginning of the story, he barely seems to care about anyone or anything else either. But underneath that cold personality is a teenager who has never really been allowed to live like a normal human being. Over the course of the series, Hiro slowly begins to question what he's been taught. He starts developing friendships once he starts meeting people, and he begins caring about other people. And eventually, he has to decide whether following orders is more important than doing what he believes is right. And next is Duo Maxwell. Duo pilots the terrifying Gundam Death Scythe. And if Hiro is the serious one, Duo is almost his complete opposite. Duo is energetic, sarcastic, he's constantly joking around, and has a very dark past. Despite his cheerful personality, Duo has experienced tremendous loss. His nickname and appearance can make him seem like comic relief, but there's much more going on underneath. Duo is one of the characters who reminds us that soldiers don't always look like soldiers. They don't always look broken. Sometimes they're just teenagers trying to make jokes because they're terrified of what's happening around them. He's personally probably my favorite character in the series too. Next is Troa Barton, and Troa pilots the Gundam Heavy Arms. Troa is quiet, he's calm, he's mysterious, and actually, he's almost too mysterious. Unlike Duo, who talks constantly, Troa rarely says more than a few words, but he becomes a powerful and loyal friend to the other pilots. His story is also heavily connected to questions of identity. Who are you if you don't know where you come from? And can someone who has been raised as a weapon actually learn how to live as a person? Then we have Katra Winner. Katra is the pilot of the Gundam Sandrock, and he's probably one of the most compassionate members of the group. Also, he's the most normal of the group, in my opinion. Katra comes from a wealthy family and has a very different background from other Gundam pilots. He's intelligent, he's diplomatic, and he genuinely wants to avoid unnecessary violence. But don't let his gentle personality fool you. Katra is an extremely talented pilot, and when he loses control, we can see just how dangerous someone with his abilities can become. Katra is particularly interesting because he represents one of the biggest themes in Gundam Wing. Can someone fight for peace without becoming part of the violence that they're trying to stop? Now, lastly, we have Chang Wu-Fei, and Wu-Fei pilots the Shenlong Gundam, which later becomes the Ultron Gundam. Wu-Fei is proud, he's serious, and he's focused on justice. He has a very strong sense of honor, and unlike the other pilots, Wu-Fei has a personal reason for fighting that goes beyond simply following orders. His wife, Milan, was killed, and Wu-Fei struggles with his feeling of failure and guilt. He often questions whether he's strong enough and whether he deserves to call himself a warrior. Wu-Fei can be stubborn, he can be arrogant, and he can be difficult, but that's what makes him an interesting character. He's constantly trying to figure out what justice actually means. And another important character in Mobile Suit Gundam Wing is Relena Peacecraft. Now, Relena initially appears to be a normal teenage girl living on Earth, but she eventually discovers that she has a connection to the Peacecraft family, which is a political dynasty associated with the idea of pacifism, and this completely changes her life. Relena believes strongly in peace, but she quickly discovers that wanting peace isn't enough, and the people around her are willing to use violence and political manipulation in order to accomplish their goals. Relena becomes one of the most important political figures in the story, and her relationship with Hiro, who's kind of the main character, even though all five of the teenage pilots play an important role. Hiro really is the main character, but and her relationship with him is one of the central relationships of the series. Hiro was trained to be a weapon, and Relena believes people should never have to become weapons. They're complete opposites, and somehow they become deeply important to each other. Next, we have Zex Marquis, and Zex Marquis is actually Relena Peacecraft's brother. Zex is one of the most important soldiers in the story, as he's a skilled pilot and a major figure within the military organization called Oz. He's also known for wearing a distinctive mask and being called the Lightning Count. And eventually, we learn that Zex isn't simply who he appears to be. As I said, his true identity connects him directly to the Peacecraft family, which he struggles with. He has his own reasons for fighting, and much of the story revolves around revenge, identity, and his complicated relationship with Relena. He also plays the part of Hiro's rival, and him and Hiro have some of the coolest battles in the entire series. Now, the last character that I wanted to talk about is Treize Khushrenada. Treize is one of the most charismatic and complicated figures in Gundam Wing. He's a leader within Oz and has an unusual philosophy about war. Treize doesn't necessarily see war as something that should simply be eliminated. Instead, he believes human beings reveal their true nature through conflict. This makes him extremely dangerous. But what's fascinating is that Treize isn't written as a simple villain. He genuinely believes in his philosophy, and that makes his conflict with the Gundam pilots much more complicated. Now, the main story of Mobile Suit Gundam Wing is these 5 teenage Gundam pilots being sent from the space colonies, and they're sent to Earth to carry out Operation Meteor. Their objective is to strike against Oz and the organizations controlling the colonies, but things don't go according to plan. The pilots begin encountering one another where they fight, they cooperate, they eventually betray each other, they get captured, they escape, and eventually they realize that the political situation is far more complicated than they were originally told. The Gundam pilots aren't simply fighting one enemy. There are multiple factions fighting for control of the Earth Alliance: Oz, the colonies, the Romfeller Foundation, and eventually the other political and military groups enter the conflict, and the pilots begin realizing that they may have been manipulated from the very beginning. Now, eventually, the Gundam pilots do begin moving away from simply following orders. They're no longer fighting because someone tells them to. They're fighting because they've developed their own beliefs. And the final battles bring the major characters together and force them to confront the consequences of everything they've done in the story so far. The war ultimately leads toward a confrontation aboard the massive space fortress Libra, and the final conflict becomes much more than another giant robot battle. It's about whether humanity can finally break the cycle of violence. Now, I'm going to leave it there, but please, if you haven't yet, go back and watch it. To this day, the story still holds up really good. The animation is a little wonky, sometimes more than others, but overall, the package is it's super worth watching, I promise. It's still one of my favorite stories ever told, and I watch a lot of anime, so take that for what you will, but I definitely think it's worth a watch. Now, for my actual experience building a Gundam. As I said in my last video, this is the first time I've ever built a Gundam, and so I was a little intimidated. So I opened the box, and I got started, and I quickly realized it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Now, the clippers I got off Amazon for like $17 were super helpful. I can see how some people maybe don't use them, but in my opinion, it was definitely worth it. As well as the files. There were some nubs and stuff, which I didn't get all of them. In the final product, you'll see in some of the videos and photos I've taken, you can still see some of the marks from the nubs and whatnot, but overall, I got a lot of it with the file, and it was super easy. As for the directions, it was super simple. All the runners are labeled with a letter, and then you find the number that it says on the directions as well, and the whole thing came together super simply. Now, there were a couple problems I had. One was instructions, while being clear, there's a lot of parts, and I couldn't always figure out how exactly they attached. Most of them went together with no problem, but there was once or twice where it didn't. Also, I can see how if you're not taking your time and you're rushing a little bit, maybe you'd break a piece. Some of these pieces of plastic are very small and very thin. Also easy to lose. As I was cutting them off the runners, some of them fell on the floor. Now, thankfully, I got it, and it wasn't an issue for me, but if your room is messy or if you're not building it in a cluttered environment, I could see how it falls on the floor, gets lodged under something, and it could be hard to find. These pieces are very small. But overall, I'd say the hardest part by far was the stickers. I used a penknife and tried to lay the stickers down as carefully as possible, but they would go on crooked or they'd get a crinkle in them. Now, it still came out really well, but that was the hardest part, getting the stickers to line up perfectly. These are very, very small stickers, so you can't use your fingers to put a sticker on like you normally would. As for the quality, I really enjoyed the quality. I think it looks great. Everything felt great. As I said, some pieces of the plastic are small and thin, but overall, in the finished product, all the smaller pieces kind of get covered up, or they're just not a problem. Like, I don't think if you drop this thing, it's going to shatter to bits or anything. Now, I ended up building this thing over the course of 2 days. Really, it only took me about 4 hours. It could have taken me longer if I would have really sanded it down. One thing I didn't use was the glass files I got. It just didn't seem super necessary. After I started putting it together, I got almost everything with a file. But it could take shorter if you're rushing and you're not filing it down as much. The nubs I'm talking about, which is where you cut it off the runner. Or it could take a lot longer, especially if you're doing things like panel lining or other custom things. But especially glass file, there's a lot more you could do with these that I didn't do. And so I could see how it could take 6-7 hours. But all in all, it was a great experience. I had a good time building it. Sat there in my room, had an anime playing, and built it. It was quiet. It was nice. It's definitely different. I spend a lot of my free time playing video games and watching anime and whatnot. And so to just sit there and kind of focus on something, it was different and it was unique. And I'd do it again. I would build another model. I don't know if I'm going to do so soon. That's not really what this channel is about. It was just an experience I wanted to document, seeing as how it was my first time ever building one of these. But it was really cool, and I could definitely see myself doing it again in the future. So I'm about to show you guys some photos and videos of the finished Gundam. And please let me know how it turns out. Leave a comment about what I could have done differently to make it look nicer and whatnot. I'm excited to see what the community thinks of how I did. So all in all, I had a great time. It was fun. I will probably build another one in the future, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you.